mojitos, crumbling facades, and Che Guevara's image plastered proudly across the walls. Yes, you will find all the clichés here in Havana.
Diplomatic relations are warming up with the country's historic enemy, the US. And the proof is here, as the stars and stripes flutter at the newly opened embassy. In December 2014, President Obama reached out after a 5-decade freeze in ties, an important step towards lifting the crippling trade embargoes on Cuba.
You see, I believe that the best way to advance American interests and values, and the best way to help the Cuban people improve their lives, is through engagement, by normalizing relations between our governments and increasing contacts between our peoples. I've always said that change won't come to Cuba overnight.
It's the start of a new era for Cubans, one in which the private sector will develop and travel will be a possibility for many who've never left the island. Some worry that Havana will lose its unique charm and that Cuban culture will change too. As the country faces this historic transition, we go in search of what the Cuban capital has to offer.
Hola, Idania! Hola, Olivia, ¿cómo estás? ¿Todo bien? Sí, let's go! Sí, vamos.
Artists have long been its best ambassadors.
If you want to see an authentic side of Cuba, of Havana, this place is a must. I always come to the Plaza Vieja. It's a lovely place.
Y mi palabra es la ley. No tengo trono ni reina, ni nadie que me comprenda, pero sigo siendo el rey.
I've already heard music in the street. It's everywhere here in Cuba. Can you tell me, why is music so important? What is this relationship between Cubans and music?
I think it's a historical relationship. Cubans have always been a very musical people. It's part of our culture. The level of cultural education is also very high in Cuba, which in turn has influenced our musicians, dancers and artists. People also say music is in our blood, because we're an island, right in the middle of the Caribbean.
Idania's father, Idania Valdés, was one of the founders of the Buena Vista Social Club. The group came to international attention in 1997 after they featured in Wim Wenders' award-winning documentary. Since then, the son style of big band percussion that the Buena Vista Social Club exported the world over has become synonymous with Cuba. Idania is proud to carry on in the family business.
And after the international success of the Buena Vista Social Club, how do you think that changed perceptions of Cuban music in other countries?
Perceptions did change. The music that Buena Vista Social Club does is really traditional Cuban music. Since the revolution, there wasn't much international promotion, and we didn't have many cultural exchanges, so we looked into ourselves on our island. And thanks to Buena Vista Social Club, this kind of music went round the world and made a place for itself internationally. This is how the band changed perceptions of traditional Cuban music, but it also opened doors for other genres of Cuban music that we hear worldwide today.
Traditional sounds of salsa, mambo and cha-cha-cha may fill the streets and the airwaves here, but some artists say the country needs to move forward and embrace more modern ways of making music.
Cuba's a country that's been frozen in time for many years, focusing on things that it's already achieved in the past. That's why, for example, the only thing to come from here and become internationally important in the last 50 years was the Buena Vista Social Club. Also, new kinds of technology don't really exist here. So, as a result, the mentality when it comes to music and arts isn't forward-thinking. It's looking backwards, at the resources we had, not inventing new ones. So Cuban music might be vibrant and emotive, but it's missing certain elements when you look at it on an international level.
Raul Paz left Cuba in 1996 and forged his career in France and the US, building on his classical training to incorporate jazz, rock and pop, a Latino blend that scored him critical and commercial success outside of his home country. Raul returned to Havana in 2008, keen to help write a new chapter in Cuba's musical history.
One of your albums is called Havanization. Obviously the word Havana is there. What does it mean?
Havanization.
At one time, a lot of Cuban artists were leaving here. They left to go and live in other places, to try their luck. This generation of artists, intellectuals, many of them never came back again. My generation is the first one which, for various reasons, did come back. And I call this generation Havanization, with the English spelling and pronunciation of the word, not the Spanish. Because the idea was of coming back and reinventing yourself with foreign influences. But for some of us, I think it was a civic responsibility to come back and be involved in the change taking place in our country.
How do you see music evolving in Cuba in the future?
Perhaps Cuba will blossom. And if Cubans take the right path, we'll have the opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to invent a whole new thing. And that goes for music too. 40 years ago, no one would have imagined that we'd be here doing this. The interesting thing about Cuba today is now, it's the present.
Caminando por La Habana.
Music might be ubiquitous here, but dance is also a major cultural export, especially ballet. Havana's Gran Teatro is a Belle Époque monument to the classical art. As a Soviet satellite for some 30 years, post-revolutionary Cuba benefited from the expertise of the home of the Bolshoi, as the USSR sent teachers and funding to support the Cuban National Ballet. Since then, the institution's produced some world-class dancers. Years ago, Carlos Acosta was practicing his pliés at the bar with his classmates. Since then, he's graced the stages of London, New York, St. Petersburg, Tokyo and Sydney. But he's come full circle now, back hard at work in Havana, where he's founded his own dance company.
No, ahí termina, ¡bang! Hay un cierre, como quiera, ya, lo que sea, pero que se terminó, ¡bang!
Now, you studied here in Havana, you grew up in the 70s and 80s here in Cuba, and then you went to make your career in Europe where you had enormous success. Was that a typical trajectory for Cuban dancers at that time?
Not really. I mean, I made it to Europe because I won Prix de Lausanne in 1990. And then immediately after, I auditioned for the director of the English National Ballet. And he came to Cuba because Cuba is very well known for the trajectory and the whole legacy of wonderful dances. So he came to audition dances for his company. And he saw me, I was just 17, and so he decided to hire me. But it wasn't always the way to go about it. Most of them, a lot of people, because of the political situation, defect, and basically they end up in a dance company in the US, which is closer to Cuba. I was lucky enough that my formation started in Europe.
Now, that time you're talking about, that moment in Cuban history, which we call the special period, how did that affect arts and dance here?
It affects everybody. It affects every part of Cuban life because Cuba remained isolated and we had no food. We have no resources. Sometimes, you know, you will go and perform in a theater and all of a sudden a power cut. The most severe years, that I recorded, it was like 93, 94, 95. And a lot of people fleeing in raft or whatever they could find. I mean, it was quite dramatic.
And for you as a Cuban living and working in Europe, how was that transition? Was it difficult?
Since I was 16, I was sort of like a gypsy, making my life and my career from one place to another. I felt the urge of coming back in the middle of a situation and everybody wanted to leave. I probably was the only person who wanted to come back because I was kind of lonely. I felt lonely. I felt that I needed my family. I came back for a couple of times and everything. My father and my family reassured me that I would help them more if I actually leave, because they needed to have that hope that at least one of us is there in the world doing something great, not just for himself, but also for the family.
Now, ballet critics often say that Cuban dancers have a special something that sets them apart. What do you think that is?
I think it's a little bit, it's a mixture of things. It's almost everything in Cuba inspires to dance. The sea is everywhere, it's a whole climax. It's that also the Cuban people have so much passion. I think it's just that Caribbean flavor and the African roots or whatever, and they're very intense, and everything they do, it's like their life depends on it.
Mm-hmm. And aside from the cultural scene and arts, what are your hopes and fears for the country as it enters this new period of change?
Well, the fears is the same one that everybody fears, that in this kind of decadence, chaotic kind of that is Cuba, there is something unique and magical, you know, and they fear that all of a sudden, you know, it will be swamped with Americans that wanted to put McDonald's and Starbucks and all this. But the bottom line is that, you know, life here is hard, you know, and people, all this passion and everything, they want to do something. They are brilliant minds and brilliant brains, and I think these changes are very positive.
Performances are not limited to the stage in Havana. The streets constitute an open-air platform for the city's talents too. Every Sunday, tourists and locals come here to Callejón de Hamel for this festival atmosphere and more popular forms of dance, like Rumba.
Rumba's really important in life.
Our heritage and our happiness are all here in this alley.
It's beautiful, it's religious, it's Afro. There's lots of graffiti.
Rumba is an important exponent of Cuba's African heritage. Its percussion, movements and rhythms have their roots in the spirituality and ritual brought to the island by slaves in colonial times. In the 1980s, outward displays of religion were banned from public places, which meant Rumba had to find a new home in this colourful enclave.
I think that one way or another, Hamel Alley has become a religious bastion, and through its art, it's also become a temple of black culture in Cuba.
Join us tomorrow at the same time where we check out the home of Cuba's most famous literary resident, Ernest Hemingway. And actor and director Jorge Perugoria joins us for a chat about Cuban cinema versus its Hollywood equivalent.